And now we will switch to English, looking at our first panel. Transformation is the topic everybody talks about at the moment, but how does it really work and come to life? Shifting business models, launching new products, digitizing, decarbonization, obvious other changes in product, business model, etc. But looking closely at the success factors of transformation, you come to people transformation. And that brings us to the role of HR. That is what we will talk about with our first panelist, and I welcome Khadija Ben-Hammada as the first panelist. Hi, Khadija.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
She's the global CHO of Merck Group. Before, she has been the global head of talent development and recruiting, and prior to that, the chief of staff and head of CEO office at Merck Group. Also happy to welcome Dr. Michael Ilgner, who is the global head of HR and real estate at Deutsche Bank. Before he took on responsibility for the bank's global HR activities, Michael was the CEO of Deutsche Sporthilfe. And as I learned, the captain of the German water polo team. Hi, good to see you.
Long time ago.
Yes. And finally, Sarena Lin. I hope Sarena is already here. She had some technical issues, but I think we will start off as the three of us, and then Sarena hopefully joins us in a few minutes or even seconds. Khadija, I would like to kick off our panel with the question, how does HR support or let me introduce Sarena. Hi, happy to have you.
Apologies for being late.
Just a quick introduction. She's board member and chief transformation and talent officer at Bayer, responsible for human resources, transformation, and strategy and business consulting. She's a member of the supervisory board of Siemens Healthineers. Sarena, we just kicked off with a question towards Khadija. How does HR support Merck's strategy Mobilize for Growth?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much, Benedict. Thank you. Good to see Michael and Sarena. Happy to be with all of you. I mean, first you talk about transformation, Benedict, and I just want to say that transformation is part of the Merck DNA. I mean, you all know that we have been around for more than 350 years. So transforming is really part of what we have to do on a constant basis, reimagining ourselves. And the role of HR is absolutely critical. And I will maybe summarize it to 3 points. The first point is really to make sure that as HR, we are business leaders. And what I'm really trying to insuffle within my organization is we understand how we contribute to the top bottom line, to the EBITDA, and how we can really impact and support Mobilize from growth. But at the same time, as an HR function, we are business leaders. We are the people's people. We are the ones supporting our employees. We are the one making sure that we improve the experience. And we all know around the table that the expectation towards the employee journey have totally changed, and we have to be constantly looking at how do we raise the bar, how do we make that experience the right feeling from day one when we onboard someone to the last day when unfortunately also someone is leaving us. And that experience journey is something super important that we need to work on as an HR function. Last but not least, we are supporting Mobilize for Growth by doubling down around our purpose, culture, and leadership. More than ever, HR plays a critical role in supporting and in driving, in leading and role modeling culture, leadership, and our purpose. We have the fortunate situation to support and improve life around us with our, let's say, product, solution, and tools. That's the best, I will say, driver and excitement when I wake up every morning. So knowing that we contribute that way is absolutely fantastic. And we really want to make sure that every single employee, the 60,000 employees we have at Merck, understand how they contribute to that beautiful mission. And we really want to double down on that. So that's how HR has accelerated the transformation and supporting Mobilizing for Growth.
That's great. We will dive more into this, how you actually do it. But that's great. Thank you so much. Michael, could you please give us a brief overview on how Deutsche Bank actually transforms?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, Khadija, Sarena, nice to be with you here, and of course with you, Benedict. Actually, I would differentiate three phases, and we had a phase from 2019 till 2022 where we have been really in a phase of intensive transformation. We exited business, we strengthened other business areas, we insourced areas, we strengthened controls, and had a clear transformational path. Now we entered this year a phase of sustainable growth, maybe for the next 2 years, with the ambition by 2025 and onwards to become the leading European, what we call global house bank, to be a solution-oriented, dedicated to clients, financial institution, which is at home and abroad there for clients and is able to solve also the biggest problems of our clients with expertise, excellence in a industry which is transforming significantly by technology. Of course, technology is taking over substantial parts of all our 4 business areas, and therefore the transformation of Deutsche Bank goes also very much along with what, and I think we will come to that later on more in detail, in which different phase do you play which role as an HR function. Yeah, the restructuring or transformation phase requires a slightly different positioning than the growth and development path. I think what combines all of us, what Khadija already said, this demand in the market for purpose, for providing, and purpose is such a buzzword, I rather try to use meaningful work. To provide people really meaningful work is one of the key motivational aspects to attract and retain the best people, and then also ensure that the only constant is change is something which is embedded into the organization, of course, driven by HR over different phases of the transformation, but at the end, always in partnership with the businesses, with the divisions, that at the end, all leaders or at the end, all employees drive forward that transformation in different phases.
Yeah, let us dive into leadership later on, because that's I think a key topic at Deutsche Bank. Sarena, looking at bias transformation, how does it actually go to place, and which role does talent management, especially within the transformation, play?
Yeah, no, thanks, Benedict, and also great to see you, Michael and Khadija. I think in some ways the journey we are on is not so different from what you also just heard about Merck and Deutsche Bank. At the end of the day, I think I also have the privilege of actually having both transformation and talent under my role. And I think that, first of all, it already signaled the importance. When we think about transformation of an organization, transformation is nothing but transforming talent and transforming people. It is about transforming people's mindsets and behaviors, and so that they have a different outlook of the business in terms of business growth, in terms of organization health. So the fact that when we talk about transformation, it absolutely is closely linked to people, I think is probably sort of the underlying principle, right? As we think about what is people and what is transformation. I think to your specific question, Benedict, what does talent management play? I think traditionally people think about talent management as the process of talent management itself. Of course, the process itself need to be flawless. Of course, the process itself need to attract the best talent and making sure that the best people get the opportunity to develop and succeed in the roles. The process itself, but I think the process itself is truly, it's a table stake, right? It's not a differentiator per se. I think the differentiator here, especially in terms of talent management in the context of transformation, is a couple of things. One is actually defining from an organization, who do we really want to be when we continue to grow, right? I mean, there's a saying in the US, they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, the truth is Bayer is a 160-year-old company with a very deep scientific foundation. But it doesn't mean that we are at a level of maturity where we need to go, right? The frontier, whether it's scientifically or technology-wise, continue to be evolving. So whether it's talent management or organizations as a whole, having that future vision of where do we need to be, and therefore what kind of talent do we need, not today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and be able to articulate that has to be number one, is the talent management defining that vision. and then be able to then leveraging the latest thinking, whether it's technology, whether it's thinking about skills-based marketplace, whether it's thinking about how do you build inclusion and diversity into the process, and how do you make sure that this truly is a user-centric and user experience-driven experience. I think that those are the things that talent management need to play. So again, the foundationally table stake. More importantly is to have that strategy and a vision where you need to go and be able to leverage the latest thinking in terms of technology, in terms of process, to make sure that you get the best into what you're trying to do here.
What all of you said is, or does a transformation of HR actually come with it to have or to be able to deliver on the people transformation? Khadija, maybe you could give us some insights looking at the role of HR playing in implementing the strategy. Is there a need for HR to transform, and if how does HR as a function has to transform?
I will say yes, there is a need to transform. And I say that in a positive way. We are not transforming because the past was wrong. We are transforming because we must constantly adjust to what's happening. And I think the beauty of working in a function like HR is we are frontline in that transformation. I like very much what Michael also say about there are sometimes on what, depending on what your business is facing, where you need different skill set. And what I feel we need as a skill set right now within the HR community is that ability to navigate through uncertain time and to manage paradigm. The paradigm that I want to talk about is the fact that we are growing, but at the same time, we are also transforming and restructuring. And you need to always have that agility to talk about growth, but also to talk about transformation at the same time. And that's how I see HR have the necessity to evolve with that. The other element, at least at Merck, where we would like also to make sure that we don't have a differentiation between HR and the business. We are the business HR. Quite often we hear the group function, the support function. We are not supporting. We are driving the business equally than the business leaders. And that's something also we try to push within the HR organization. I talked during the introduction about bottom line, top line, EBITDA. I made a point to always talk about the business when I talk to my community, because it's very important. With all the access to information we have today, we cannot not understand how we contribute to the business. And really how we also want to need to change is in a much more integrated way to look at the employee experience journey. Serena did a good job talking about the vision for talent management, and she's right, the process is important. But what we're also trying to move away a bit at Merck is that process, let's say, reputation that HR might have. And I like to talk about products that we are proposing, solution that we are launching that our employee can consume, because we are always seen as a function that bring governance and process. It's the other way around. We have more product, more solution that help and really help the environment, the workforce to thrive and to succeed. So that end-to-end integrated employee journey and how they feel integrating that element is definitely where I see the necessity to shift a little bit gears on our side, at least.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You're all pointing out to be very close to the business or to be even integrated into the business. Michael, just to rephrase the question I just had to Khadija, what is the most important job of HR at Deutsche Bank within the transformation you explained?
Before I come to that, let me pick up on your last point and what Khadija said, because I think it's this balance that we are service-oriented to our internal customers, but at the same time on eye-level partnerships, that we are also driving forward, that we are thought leaders. I mean, we all share as HR passionate people that sometimes leaders think HR is something I can do by myself. And that's ideal if this is the perception, if people have a passion for that. But we also need to constantly bring forward, as Khadija also said, products, innovation, smart ideas, but the ones which are fit for purpose for the situation, which are also not built up in a scientific environment that nobody understands. That we have 13,000 leaders at Deutsche Bank. Whatever we develop in HR, we also have to make sure that we can also bring it to our leaders, that they can pick it up and that they can live it daily in the branches, in discussions with the customers and the clients, etc. But now to come back to your question. So the most important job, and I link that to your previous question to me, it actually differed by phase. So as I said before, in the transformational phase, it was a lot about consulting and also driving with the business, exiting business, entering new businesses, strengthening certain functions, and also focus on certain areas like technology, for example, and in particular also making sure that we have the diversity aspect in areas where we're particularly weak, that we do something different, for example, for women in technology, and that we come up with creative ideas to drive that forward. I want to pick up one particular point, which maybe is the best expression for this balance between partner and service organization, which is to make sure that, and I don't want to overload the word culture, but that we are also a function which helps to put the success factors for committed people always in the center of our engagement. And if you look in our people survey, we find out that people who understand the strategy and who have regular conversations with their leaders, those are the two almost most correlated factors to a high commitment of people. To get there, we have to strengthen feedback culture. We have to make sure that we also measure that we also teach how to do that and how to maybe in particular do that in transformative times. So that was one part which is also was in the core transformation, but it's now also for the sustainable growth area relevant. And then it's about also unleashing the potential we all have, because we just went through the biggest change in work set up since the last 50 or 80 years with future of work through the COVID times, which was accelerated. How do we meet? How do we rest and reflect? How do we ensure that diverse views are still seen? How do we teach learning in that area, leveraging AI, and also a generation which learns differently than with classic school teacher, and experience anyhow is the most efficient way of learning. But how do we make sure that this also is picked up by everybody? We do that, for example, via AI-based tools, and also a clear understanding what is our current skill set and what's the skill set for the future, and how do we become more predictive about where are our gaps and how can we fill those with upskilling, with dedicated training, and also, of course, with attracting and developing the most relevant talents. So I would again say the role of HR is, and I agree with both Sarena and Khadija, is these days so exciting, because this change aspects, I think, across the industries, and I think this is coming from macroeconomic factors like workforce globally has changed, how attitude has changed towards work, etc. How shortage of labor also has developed, but also how technology came into play for high demanding jobs, that an organization which doesn't leverage that will not be competitive. And there we have entered a completely different age, where we have to make sure that our people are also owning AI and those elements to be thought leaders in their respective businesses.
Yeah, let me pick up on the point of leadership. Sarena, what is the role of leaders in driving sustainable transformation? What are like critical skills for leaders to develop to really drive transformation?
That's one of the biggest topic, isn't it, Benedict? I think we all talk about leadership, for decades. We all know the difference between leaders and managers. I think especially if you look about the evolution of big corporations like all of ours, right? Moving from that sort of managerial mindset to leadership mindset is probably one of the biggest things that you see over the decades. But the truth is, I think the definition of leaders is probably more robust than ever, just based on what you already hear from both Michael and Khadija in terms of the role of the changes that's happening. I think the way that we've been talking about and defining about what kind of leaders need to be, the easiest way is probably just do a bit of a comparison and contrast what is and what is not, right? So the kind of leaders are not managers. That difference from couple aspects. Leaders are the one that says, I have a vision, I know where to go, but I don't necessarily have every step all laid out yet. Why? Because I'm also the one that I will remove roadblocks and then I'll empower my team to lay out those steps rather than me being the one doing it. Because guess what? My team collectively is smarter than me, right? In other words, I'm also here to coach and mentor, and I'm creating the environment where everybody feel that they are here to contribute, and I'm not here to manage and dictate. And ultimately, I think a really important aspect of this, especially given the environment is changing very fast. If we want to model that unpredictability as a manager, as a leader, I need to say, I don't know what the future is going to look like. The best I can do is control what's controllable and role model the kind of behaviors I want to see from the rest. Ability to challenge, ability to learn from experiences, ability to move fast without 100% information, and ability to say, I don't know, or I learned from this. And I think that role modeling piece is absolutely critical because it's not going to be governed by processes or policies of how leaders need to behave. And ultimately, leaders will have to continue to shape its environment by saying, let's enable the group's collective wisdom to really think about the way to move forward. And the only way to do that is for the leaders to say, yes, let's be in this together and let me role model the kind of behaviors that we want to see. And I think especially at Bayer, we started this leadership journey about a year ago, right? What we call engage, shape, perform. Happy to talk more about it, but it's a very simple idea that says, look, there's no more complicated than that. As a leader, the expectation is for you to really learn how to engage yourself and engage your team differently to ensure everybody bring their 100% to work. It's about shaping your environment, right? Having the courage to challenge status quo. And last but not least, obviously drive performance. But the critical piece is performance here is more than financial performance. It's also organization health, as well as the commitment you have to your employees, your customers, and your communities. So engage, shape, perform is how we kind of define the expectations to the leaders.
How do you actually bring it to life? Is it a part of the compensation and benefits? Are there like hard measures, etc.? Let's take 1 or 2 minutes more to really understand how you shift, because leaders are like people, they live their lives, they have their attitudes, they have their behaviors. How do you actually change that? Or is it appropriate to change? Or
yeah, no, I think it's absolutely the core of the question here, right, Benedict? Change is hard. And I think the paradox here is the more senior leaders become, actually the harder to drive change for obvious reasons, right? We are all products of our own experiences, right? Especially leaders. So indeed, and we don't expect this to be an overnight journey. And what we're doing is probably 3 or 4 things. One is we definitely have a set of classical training programs that we're running. Small group, very much focusing on individual coaching and self-discovery, focusing on some of the core elements of what does it mean to be a good leader. And we're rolling it out now. As of yesterday, about 10,000 of our leaders have gone through this program that started Q3 last year. Right? So the classic training, just to level set everybody in terms of same terminology, same expectations. But I think probably even more importantly is how do you leverage the rest of the organization to say we have different expectations of our leaders today, right? Because just having a top-down approach is not enough. We got to sort of empower the employees to say, we expect something different. We expect something different for the future because an environment has changed so much. And allowing the employee base to have that kind of tool set, which is something we're rolling out, new ways of working, simple tools to make sure that people really get the idea that this is everybody's job. And 3, the hardest part is what we all keep on talking about. It's the role modeling, right? I think, not only a role of HR, but really is all the leaders to say, ultimately changing the mindset of 100,000 employees starts with that one person. How do we make sure everybody is willing to take that one step forward and challenge, role model, encourage? And that's what we're trying to do here.
Okay, great. Thank you for diving deeper into that. Khadija, Michael just pointed out the importance of people planning, skills planning, etc. Imagining Merck's workforce in like 2030, how will it be different to today's workforce, in your opinion?
Oh, it will be quite different. I would say so, which is quite fascinating, intriguing, but it's also quite scary because I feel that 2030 is just around the corner. But I think Michael talked about that, about predictive and prediction. I think what we are doing at Merck is really try to first gain transparency about our workforce today, gain clarity about where we are going by 2030 from a business point of view, from a workforce point of view, and try to fill the gaps. And we are using a couple of data and data scientists and AI to understand that. But really the starting point is that level of transparency that we need. We aim to move towards more a skill set mindset versus we have a job, we have a person, and we fit the job with the person, to really to think about what are the skills that we have in-house right now. And you will be surprised, Benedict, that sometimes, and I'm sure we are not the only organization, I don't think we have a good grasp of all the great talent we have within our organization. So it really starts by understanding the beautiful talent we have and skill set we have across the organization. We talk a lot about scenario planning with our business, and we do that hand to hand with them. We sit with them, we understand what's the vision for 2030, and we try to translate that into skill sets. What are the skill sets, very specific skill set we need? We then integrate, Benedict, some external data points like attrition, like retirement, like growth, and then we see, okay, if we don't do anything, what's the worst scenario? What's the medium scenario? What's the best scenario? And then based on that, we are capable to say, those are the skill sets that we need tomorrow. How many employees can we retrain towards those specific skill sets? Because if you don't know what you need, you cannot have the right reskill or training approach to do that. And then if we cannot retrain internally, then that's where we are much more proactive in the way we attract talent. We try to have a strong sourcing activity and be very proactive and targeting some specific skill set we need to buy as soon as possible. And I would say that will be really the game changer in the future, upskilling, retraining. If you look at some of the statements coming from the World Economic Forum, they are saying that by 25, 50% of the employees will have to be retrained. So that's a big challenge, I assume, for myself, for Michael, and for Sarena as well, that we are looking at Merck very seriously from a skill set management point of view, as well as doubling down in data, AI, and technology.
So important to do so. And also, again, it's a topic of leaders, and maybe just coming back to that, Michael, the leaders play a critical role. We learned that, and that's what we talk about ages. Leadership is heterogeneous. How do you ensure that leadership is coming to life at Deutsche Bank and is in line with transformation goals? You just gave a sneak peek towards the Deutsche Bank Leadership Compass. Maybe you can dive more into that to really understand.
Yeah, happy to do so. So I think the first point to your question, I would reiterate something we had before, what also Sarena was talking about, for managers to leaders. And one other kind of metaphor for that is, from my perspective, that leaders need not to tell people to work on something, but towards something, and to express that in how we also tell our leaders that this is how they also can get the best talent also within the organization. I mean, let's be honest, also in organizations, there's a war for talent, and leaders need to create followers, and to make clear that purposeful driven leadership is actually more than ever something which in particular the generation which is now coming into our organization is asking for. There is, for example, compensation, of course, in this industry is still a relevant point, but not as dominating as it used to be before. The first point when asking what is an employer of choice looking like, what are the key factors coming back, then the answer is purpose and meaningful work, followed by empowering leadership style and developing flexibility and learning opportunities. So that's what we try to bring our leaders. To the second point, as you said, I mean, we are, as I think all of the three of us, very global organization. We operate in more than 50 countries, have 159 nationalities, and have 4 different businesses. Retail banking in Germany compared to investment banking in New York at the Wall Street is both financial sector, but they are very different skill sets, and partially also cultural aspects differ in those areas. So to just define the one leader ambition would fall short of also leveraging the diversity of this global footprint and this global perspectives. And as I said before, we also consider it as a success factor to be maybe not the largest bank in the world, but compared to our size, being the most diverse and solution-oriented bank, which cracks the nut in particular when it's not that straightforward and when clients can really rely on us to help something which was not known before. For that, we also have to allow a heterogeneous leadership environment. But at the same time, of course, we need a combined aspect. Culture, I love to define with collective memory of an organization, and therefore how we defined this leadership compass, which you mentioned already. By the way, leadership compass is already expressing the thought behind. It's not a compass, it's not something which shows you one-to-one where exactly to go to, but it shows you to go towards something. And we worked with our 14,000 leaders over a phase of almost a year to carve out the essence of 8 leadership principles, which we set up as an ambition. We also signed that at the management board, at the GMC, the extended management board, to say we are committed to those behaviors, which, independent from geographical differences, of business differences, those are our future-oriented principles, which we, by the way, now integrate into people survey, into year-end reviews, performance assessment, etc., where we also try to lead from the top, but also there allow that different leaders read those different principles in a different way. And a couple of those principles are invest time to lead and inspire. That it needs to be a conscious effort to sit down with your people in those changing times to really make sure that you also help to develop, seek and own feedback, promote a sense of belonging, encourage solutions, and getting better at getting better. It's never done. It's something which continuously develops, and somebody is more advanced in the journey, somebody is less advanced in the journey. So this is how we try. And these principles, they might sound like buzzwords also, or classic managerial literature, but we didn't ask any, with all respect for fantastic consultants, any external resources or experts. We did that by ourselves, that this expresses our DNA, that people can say, these are our principles, this is what we want to be known for. And then we feed back and to them and say, okay, in your people survey results, your 500, 2,000, whatever people in your area, how do they also assess how you live those principles and how the next level lives that? What does that mean? We have an upwards feedback tool developed, which is done within very few minutes and gives immediate results to also constantly strengthen the muscle. That this is not just a poster, as you see behind me, maybe partially, but this is really something which you can constantly look at and constantly, like a compass, use wherever you are as an orientation point to lead towards something versus to lead to work on something.
I really like this picture of having like a true north as the compass gives you. Coming from leadership skills to skills overall in the organization, Sarena, is the skills-based organization becoming reality, like moving from job descriptions, job functions, towards a more skills-based type of project organization, maybe? Do you see that shift?
Well, so is it becoming reality? No, not yet. Is it a necessary shift? Yes. And I think you also already heard from Michael and also from Khadija that because I think pandemic has accelerated a bit of the deconstruction of the traditional model, right? One job description, one manager, one location, right? So this idea of workforce and workplace clearly is being reshuffled. And if you think about what's core in that, ultimately is skills. And I think ultimately, especially if you look into the future, the truth is, I thought the question you asked Khadija earlier was interesting. What is the workforce going to look 5-10 years from now? The truth is, I don't think any of us can say with 100% certainty what is going to look like, right? Even 6 months ago, none of us have predicted something like ChatGPT that will come to play. right? And how that will change, and I think and I know I'm sure that will be one of the questions or we'll debate and discuss, but I think it's simply too immature for any of us to say this is how it's going to develop. So the best we can do when it comes to skills is defining the skills that's needed for future potential growth, right? Defining the skills that allows people to have that kind of growth mindset to grow into what they think is needed to be done within their team, within their project work, rather than a fixed job description. So I think that skill-based development and skill-based definition absolutely is critical. And I think the second piece of it is indeed, right, if we want to give the fluid work environment that many people are looking for and many people have experienced during the pandemic, to say you start to have this very sort of fluid way of organizing, whether it's gig-based assignment, whether it's project, whether it's short-term virtual assignments, whether it's more traditional career path, to make all these different combinations work. It's no longer simple job description that plays somebody into a role for multiple years, right? That simply doesn't work. So I think forcing the business themselves, obviously, as everybody said, together with the expertise of HR to help defining what are those skill sets needed, not today, but for the future, and enabling the employees to have visibility to that and be able to not only identify for themselves what skills they already have today, but more importantly, how do they build towards those skill sets that will allow them to continue to be very marketable, right? Is, I think, the job that we all need to do.
I totally agree. That's one of our theses. So I can see that totally shifting to a skills-based organization. You mentioned ChatGPT, and you said it's maybe not that evolved and it's not an integral part. But how do you work at it at HR, at Bayer overall? How do you use AI tools like ChatGPT? Is it becoming part of a daily work, and do you see it that it will substitute jobs, or what's your point?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, that I think it's too early for us to have a definitive answer of the impact it will have. I'll say a couple of things. So right now, as an organization, we have a number of pilots going on, both within HR and also outside of HR, right? To really both test the benefits of generative AI, but also to understand its risks. I think from HR's perspective, the pilots we're driving, tying back to the skill base, is indeed how do we use AI to really help define that skills talent marketplace internally, to allow much faster identification of skills and job matching, right? That's one. Two is how do we use that also to really understand much deeper, what does it mean by leadership and performance? Right. And as you all know, there's lots of different technologies out there, whether it's listening, whether it's understanding the networks, whether it's also understanding simply by really understanding the engagement level of the individuals in the team, you can start building the profiles of the individuals, right? And be able to help them to be better leaders. And last but not least, in terms of learning and training and development, we are piloting ways of how something like similar tools such as ChatGPT can potentially help accelerate those and deliver much more real-time and more relevant training and potentially quote unquote advice, right? In a controlled environment, right? We also know the risk associated with it. So how do you make sure that the environment is controlled, the content is vetted, is some of the things. But again, I think most importantly, the question I'm sure many of employees are starting to ask is, how is it going to affect me? Is my job going to go away? And my sort of answer and my thinking on this has always been, again, number one, it's too early to tell, but it's not dissimilar to the introduction of, remember the days when emails come on board? Remember the days when iPhone came on board, right? These tools were introduced in such a way that no one could have predicted the impact it has. And these are the kind of, I think that's the mindset that we all need to have, embracing the technology, understanding how it could potentially supplement the current work, but more realistically then continue to see, during the substitution process, at some point in time, yes, some jobs will go away. But yet at some point in time, you realize that human beings, we're so resilient. We realize tools are only tools. There's always going to be higher level value added stuff that technology will not be able to replace. right? So eventually, I think that substitution will happen over time, just like any other technology that came before this.
Yeah, it's not happening like this, and then it's on, everything is going to be gone. I totally see that. We've been talking about skills. We've been talking about the sizing or right sizing, and Michael has been talking about culture. Khadija, maybe we're coming nearly to an end because we have a lot of Q&A going on, and I want to open the panel in a second. Maybe two more questions, one towards you, Khadija, and one towards you, Michael. Starting with Khadija, what about culture? How do you bring culture actually to life at Merck?
That's a very, very good question. And that's a question that is super close to my heart. I strongly believe that culture is the differentiator for any organization. And I really like what Michael said about the engagement survey result and the correlation to performance, but also to the fact that people want to come to work for more than their paycheck, but for really meaning, activity, and meaning work. I think, let me do maybe a sport analogy that I really like to use with my team and my colleagues. I mean, we all know that a company has to perform and outperform, and performance is, of course, essential to us and to any organization. And I like to say that performance to become a most admired company or an employer of choice is something that you need to have. You need to have great quality of product and solutions. So performance is the entry ticket to the game, to watch the game. But culture is what will get you upgrade to the front row. And you need to have both at the same time. And quite often we focus on performance, and then when we have time, we look at culture. And I really say that today both are equally important, and even more than in the past. People, when you look at Glassdoor and Yammer, they put comments about the culture of an organization, and that's what matters the most. If you also look at some exit interview, people comment about the culture, they comment about the leadership, how they have been treated by their leaders. So that culture, that focus is absolutely essential. So the way we do it at Merck, very similar to what we have heard from Sarena and from Michael on the leadership compass, it starts at the top. Clearly, it starts with our executive board, and they really made the pledge to really support a high impact cultural environment to make sure that we have diversity, inclusion, that we treat people fairly, that we create an environment where everyone can thrive. Secondly, we try also to recognize and reward the right culture, the right leadership, because I think role modeling is one thing, but if we don't reward those who are really playing the game versus the others, I think that's where you start to not be credible within the organization. And to your question a little bit earlier, Benedict, about to Sarena, about how we measure leadership and how we push leaders to do it. I think right now what we are trying to also integrate at Merck is to make sure that within our performance management for our top 300, the how is equally important than the what. Truly to make sure that we really put that focus on that. Last but not least, I always say that leadership is a choice and it's a responsibility. So it's also a key message that we give to our organization. You have to own the culture. You have to be here for your people. You have to lead by example. And this is your choice. That's not HR telling you to do it. That's not your manager telling you to do it. This is your choice. You decide the kind of leader you want to be, what kind of legacy you want to leave behind you. And you have to also, let's say, deal with that responsibility and that accountability. So that's how we really push the topic around culture and really starting from the top and at all level. And we really have a set of tools, but I will pass over that because very similar to what we hear from Michael as well. So that's how we do it at Merck.
Absolutely, that's the perfect bridge towards the question to Michael. Michael, you once said Deutsche Bank needs to reinvent itself. I really like this idea of companies continuously reinventing themselves. What do you mean by that? How do you define that term, and how do you actually do it? I'm sure you mentioned a lot of tools and instruments to do it, but maybe you could give us rounded up with that term.
Yeah, thank you. I try to keep it brief. So technology and digitalization is in our industry, of course, a key factor. And therefore, I always come back to the same points. Learning culture, continuous improvement culture, and also be open for complete new areas. And at the same time, investing into areas where is a shortage of skills, for in particular in technology, and for example also in particular in women in technology. So we are trying to really bring that mindset into the organization, and then also have lighthouses which are unexpected. For example, when the awful Ukraine war started, we were approached by an NGO, or we approached actually also, I think the NGO, to create within a few hours, days, a job portal for people fleeing and trying to come together here and finding new opportunities in Europe. And nobody would have expected probably that it's Deutsche Bank who is coding that. But we have so many, and then we send out an email to a couple of areas where we know there's technology, and all of a sudden, I don't know how many, I think more than 100 within a few minutes volunteered and said, actually, even if it goes beyond my job, I'd love to help here, because that's also an area where I can prove that we have developed technology skills which you would not have associated with Deutsche Bank 20 or 30 years ago. So it's about that mindset, and then also on the client side, on the product side. I think it's a typical German approach to develop a product in a sequential approach, and therefore agile, despite the fact that I'm not always a fan of all these topics and words around that, but the idea of agile, coming faster to a prototype, earlier to the client, testing it and then refining it, just increasing the speed of innovation cycles, and setting that into the mindset of people in an area where digitalization and technology is completely transforming our industry. That's what we are working on, that we pick that up proactively and not reactively.
So, sounds great, picking up speed in this development. Let me open the Q&A, and we have quite some questions. Maybe towards Sarena, starting with the first question. You talked about how you upskill and transform leaders at Bayer. What would you say is a key capability or skill that the HR workforce that have no formal leadership role needs to strengthen?
Yeah, I think so it's a great question, Benedict. I think within HR, the truth is we are also building our own HR academy to make sure that HR is indeed up to the task, right? In terms of guiding the organization. And it has a couple elements to it. I think there's an aspect of really understanding the business, which Khadija also mentioned, critical business that for HR leaders to have that. I think that there's a second piece of the future vision. What does it mean to really drive talent strategy? Talent strategy, we already talked about skill-based. The future of work, we talked about technology changes. I think critical HR leaders absolutely need to be able to bring these pieces together and say, what does it mean in terms of the talent strategy that I need to help develop that meets the business challenges, right? Going back to point number one. So understanding the businesses, the ability to develop talent strategies very quickly. And three is actually this ability to actually be true coaches to the business leaders. Because ultimately, business leaders, we talked about role modeling. We talked about the leadership expectations. Leaders need to have people, and I think HR is a perfect sort of function to play that role, to be the sounding board as well as coaches to the leaders to help them become better leaders. And I think HR need to have that ability to do that. And yes, absolutely, we as HR leaders need to train ourselves to have those kind of ability to do so. So it is, multifaceted, and not everybody need to develop all these skill sets, right? Because we also need different skill sets to address different sides of the problem. But I will say at the high level, those are the topics that we're focusing on.
Great. So many questions come into my mind, but I'll stick to the questions the participants are having. Khadija, towards you, we talked about being HR being a part of business, and the question is, how exactly do you realize HR being a part of business? How did the shift from HR as a support function to HR as a part of the business work, and what were the most noticeable changes?
The way we do it at Merck is so very simple, and I'm a big fan of doing the first thing first. So if you have an HR meeting and you only talk about HR, and you don't bring what's happening in business, that's a missed opportunity. So for example, making sure that we start and we end every meeting with what's happening around us, again, from a commercial point of view, from a launch point of view, from a governmental point of view. So that's one way to do it. I mean, again, with having access to so many data points, it's just almost impossible to not know what's happening to business. We invite quite often business leaders as well to join some of our meetings, and developing every solution, product, our HR strategy, it really starts again with the vision, with the business vision. So that's how we do it. I'm also very happy to see that our business partners sit eye to eye with the business, and that's even more important to play the role that Sarena just mentioned, that coaching part. You can only do it if you really sit at the level, and to gain that credibility, to challenge the business and to advise them, you need to speak their own language. That's how they will welcome you to challenge them. So that's how we also do it at Merck. Really those kind of way of getting close to the business. I'm also glad to see that every leadership in the business are very welcoming to have the HR sitting at the table, so they are part of the extended leadership. There's no differentiation because again of that credibility that has been built.
I have a question in the end. I would like to spare like 2 minutes coming back to that. Michael, the question is, in times of transformation, anxiety can defeat the ability to try out a new approach and eventually change behaviors. How do you practically secure psychological safety?
Different, very good question, very timely question. Different aspects. I pick out two. The first one is really make sure that there is a constant seek and own feedback circle, and that people take time. And as I was referencing to that earlier, that you also see the more visible leadership you have, and the more you really take time to talk and feedback. And of course, our days are limited, but we all also know that you have to make an effort to really do that, and to be disciplined about speaking to people and providing feedback. So that's one thing, because then often myths can be addressed, anxiety can be addressed, and I also like what Khadija just said. Also, context is relevant. Why are we doing that? Again, what's the business context, etc. And then if you speak and don't go into your own area, then I think you can address that. There is a complete different aspect which we did not really, and I think this is not in terms of the importance, but how much can you in 45 minutes touch about well-being. And I think it's also a question of this generation we are living in, that we define well-being in 4 different dimensions: physical, mental, societal, and financial. And I think in particular, the mental well-being is an area where companies like ours, who are human resource driven, need to make an effort to show what we can do, what we also can't do as organizations. But we have, for example, one key sentence, which is, "It's okay not to be okay." And we try to also communicate that via management board members, and then provide, for example, so-called mental first aiders, a great idea which started in the UK and is now spread across the world, because it doesn't help to avoid that. And at the same time, it's an area where we as an employer cannot address all the aspects of a personal well-being. Therefore, it's even more important to talk about those points where we can make a difference, where we can have impact, and that we also, again, make sure that this can be spoken about. And therefore, this message of "it's okay not to be okay" is for us one example of telling people there is not a contradiction between being a high-performing organization and culture, and at the same time being able to rest and reflect. And you alluded to a long time ago, I came from sport, and the analogy there is muscle only grows when they rest. They never grow when you constantly push them. So also to bring that mentality in a high-performing organization helps to have sustainable performance culture. And I think that's something where talking about this is probably the most relevant measure.
Oh, that's great to hear. It's a different strength. It's not like the strength we are having in the 1950s and 60s of being the biggest, the tallest, the one with the most muscle. Sarena, one longer question regarding a skills-based organization. It is en vogue and dominating the HR media globally since over a year for successful workforce transformation. To what extent do you believe it is crucial that large corporations build up comprehensive skills data, a skills-based talent management, and strategic skills-based workforce planning?
Wow, that is a longer question and also a longer answer, isn't it? And I actually suspect that my fellow panelists here will all have great answers to that. I think, as I shared earlier, I think this is a direction that we all need to continue to explore. And the truth is, at Bayer, we're actually trying to do something differently. We actually decided not to start by building a huge skills taxonomy, because that has been, if you think about the strategic workforce planning effort that many companies have gone through over the last 10 years, that's usually where you start. You say, let's start by building the overall structure and then kind of figure out how everything fit into it. And I think we basically come to this conclusion that, again, going back to this premise that the world is moving way too fast for us to try to put something down on paper or agree with the organization, what are the skill sets you need for every job? Because the day you do that, most likely it will be outdated. Right? So the question is, when we think about skills, is actually, how do you start small? So starting with really defined teams, and that's what we're driving about 4 pilots as we speak, to say within your team, if you are very crystal clear about the business strategy you're trying to accomplish, define the 5 to 7 skills that you absolutely need. And these skills need to be specific. These are not leadership skills, right? These are very specific skills that you say you absolutely need. And can you articulate that? What does good skill means for those though, right? So these are not just words on paper. And I think you almost need to start small with a very concrete ideas to say how this is going to translate from business to people to skills, and have that layout as case studies so that the organization can then learn from it. Right? So we're starting small rather than building a big taxonomy. That's one. And 2 is having the tools to support it. So we are leveraging, we have partnership with 2 external companies to say, how do we build this internally to quickly identify skills of our internal employees, to quickly identify skills via external sources and social media and LinkedIn posts, to be able to sort of quickly categorize them so that there's some starting point. But more importantly, when you talk about skills marketplace, is to be able to create a bit of that matching internally. So this is all work in progress. I can't tell you how far and how much this is going to go, because I think keeping that agile mindset and continue to learn as we experiment has to be, I think, the name of the game here.
Totally. I could go on for hours with you, but your time is limited. I thank you all 3 so much for giving insights, being really open, having an inspiring conversation. So thank you, Sarena Lin. Thank you, Khadija Ben-Hammada. Thank you, Michael Ilgner. I will switch back to German. Thank you again for making the time, and hand over to my colleague Stefan Lösch. Hello, Stefan.
Hello, Benedikt.